All right,
Okay.
so Carmen, do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Carmen Sinatra. I'm the math department head at Richmond Hill High School. And I am here with my colleague Erin, and we've been together a long time, uh, 20 years, I think, now at Richmond Hill High School.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's been an amazing ride, and I'll let Erin continue on with that.
Yeah, so as Carmen says, we're as we just jokingly say, we're teacher twins. We've been able to start with thinking classrooms for the last, I don't know how many years at this point. And we have sort of been working through this idea of a markless classroom together for the past 3 years or so. So yeah, so we both teach full-time math, and right now, in terms of what we've been doing with the markless classroom, so I have I have 9 gifted math classes, and so I've been doing the markless class in there for 3 years, and Carmen has been doing it with her 9 applieds, which is
Yes.
kind of for the college as opposed to university kind of driven kids. And she's been doing that for the last 2 years. So that's kind of where we began with things. Once we started into building classrooms, so we had gotten very deep into defronting the classroom, random groupings and doing all those kinds of things that it became sort of important to us to start thinking about, well, if we changed our practices, but then all we're doing is having them sit down and do quizzes, tests, and that's it. We wanted to find something different. So yeah, when it comes to the whole gradeless, markless, most people call it gradeless. I don't know, I was the only one that was doing this around where we were, and we kind of gave it the moniker of markless because we do have to create grades, right? There has to be something on a report card. So essentially, yes, it's all the same thing, but I don't know. We've just always called it markless.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what it kind of feels like to us. Yeah, we don't mark stuff, but we have to create a grade at something. So I'm still hearing people dinging in, but that's kind of our background, and it's been a wild ride, and so we're here to share with you sort of how we started this, what it looks like, and hopefully we can share some results and what we've noticed having gone through this process. And this is completely based, obviously, in what Peter has done. When Peter came to our school and did a session or 2-day full day sessions with us and the people in our board, and we kind of took the model that he sort of kind of presented to us and kind of ran with that idea. So, we tried to, I think, stay kind of true to what he had suggested. He's actually come and visited us a few times, and so we've kind of refined our process with him as well. So certainly this is not something we've done on our own, and we certainly appreciate all of his help and guidance that way. So
yeah. Okay.
What do you think? Should we get started?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, let's get started.
So you guys can see our presentation. So so just want to go through sort of where it began first. We'll take a break sort of in the middle. So if there's questions, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions popping up as we go. So we're going to try to get through the presentation part relatively quickly, so we have hopefully a good chunk of time for questions and discussion and all that kind of stuff. It's as much as what we've done, I think we feel pretty successful in what we're doing, and we feel like it's been really good. It's always good to get different points of view and to hear from you guys too, because sometimes with this, since when you're the first ones out there, you kind of feel like you're on an island a little bit. So I think the more we share, the better it's going to be. So let's get started. So as I said, we had been dealing with, this is obviously part of the Building Thinking Classroom framework, right? I wouldn't start with markless. I think you need to make those changes, in terms of the style of your class and that kind of thing. But if you're thinking about this, the reasons why we kind of were thinking about this idea of, essentially taking away the focus on marks, right? That's really what a markless, gradeless classroom is that we don't want to focus on, the number. It's all about, as Peter says, it's a data collection, right? We want to kind of collect information about how a student's, been working through things, what they're able to accomplish, and through that process, eventually we can, quantify that. So the things we like about this is that I always say when it comes to marks, we say, okay, you must have a test on October 31st. And on October 31st, if this kid doesn't know how to do it, too bad. But if on November 1st, all of a sudden they figure it out, why isn't that information that we should take into consideration, right? Why an arbitrary date on a calendar? Learning is learning. And so the flexibility involved in this was sort of one big thing for us. So that ability to keep the learning going, that, how many of us have ever had, you give back the test, you go through the solutions or whatever you do, and as the kid's leaving, what do? They drop it in the recycle bin on their way out, right? Because it's done. Whereas this keeps the learning going. So essentially what happens is when the test is done, the quiz is done, they get extra opportunities, okay? So we want to see that progression. We want to give them more opportunities in different ways than we typically have. And because of the flexibility of this model, you're able to do that. Yes, exactly. The whole data driven. And it is data driven, but exactly, that's not data, right? Grades are not necessarily data. And the beauty of this is that it really changes the conversation. So in Ontario, we have, our very specific expectations and that kind of stuff. But often, the way our marks are kind of broken down, we get focused on, well, how do I improve my knowledge mark versus my application mark? And, depending on where you're at, obviously, there'll be different sort of scenarios for that. But the focus sort of is not about the learning. It's simply about how do I make the number change, right? And that's not at all what our goal is. And so as we have a program where the kids can see their mark, Will was just explaining, they're supposed to, in the States, they're supposed to update marks every week, which I can't even imagine that. But, for us, the program that we have, the kids can check their mark at 3 a.m. And I'm always telling the kids, guys, you're never going to see a mark at 3 a.m. For the classes that I still give marks for, because we're not quite there yet. But they focus on that number. And that is where personally I have seen, and I'm sure a lot of you would agree, the amount of, stress in terms of test anxiety, just that focus on the number, their mark drops a 1%, right? The kid crying over a half a mark. It's exploded. And, we need to do something about it, right? That has to change. It's like, it feels like it's going to explode. So that was another big thing for us. And then just the ability to be able to incorporate, like, how do I put into a mark that I saw the kid do this question while they were working in class, or that we talked about this question and I can see they understand it. So again, that flexibility of being able to incorporate things that you notice, things that you see the kid doing, that all that can be incorporated into that. Okay. So yeah, where do you start? Number one question, everybody's like, well, how do I get my admin to tell or to allow me to do this? Short answer is you can't. We are blessed with probably the most fantastic admin I've had in all the years we've been doing this. And quite honestly, she was there in the meetings, in the sessions we had with Peter, and she was willing to come in, listen to what he had to say, and was such a champion for this for us, and said, go for it. So yes, you need that support. And we understand how rare that can be. There's wonderful admin, and if you get the chance to do it, I think the more they get to see it and the more we can get that spreading in their realm of things, that's going to be a good thing. We have each other. That was our best support for sure. In fact, when I started this, Carmen was on a leave, and even in the middle of her leave, we're emailing and throwing out ideas and stuff like that. Yeah, so you need each other. You need even just one, and if it's us, if it's whoever, right? Like, take advantage of what you can. And through my work, I've kind of made connections with different things. Yeah, so absolutely, we can share. We're gonna, we have what we lovingly refer to as our,
Care package.
Yeah, our care package. So we can throw the letter to parents in there. But that was the thing, is that once we were given the, okay, go for it, it really can't happen in a bubble, right? You need to be out there telling parents, here's what we're going to do, here's why we're going to do it, here are the benefits we're looking for. And in our area, it's an affluent, high academic school that we teach in. And, so this idea that, they'll never let us do that. Yeah, they did. And I got no flack from parents. I definitely got some raised eyebrows, but when they hear that what you're trying to do is for the benefit of their child, to lessen their stress and anxiety, to give them more opportunities, like what parent isn't going to go, okay, that sounds pretty good, right? So you do need to be really clear about that with them. So I'll pass it over to Carmen and kind of start to get into the practicalities of this. So how did we make this work?
Okay, so, and I'm going to hand a lot of this credit to Erin. Like she said, the year that we decided, okay, yeah, we're going to go for it, then I went on a leave. So I felt a little bad, but she managed. And then when I came back, we really got into it. So she did a lot of work on this amazing stuff.
Thank you.
It is
great help.
It is. It seems a bit daunting, a bit complicated at the beginning, but and I certainly felt overwhelmed when I first got into it. But then after a while, you're like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. So one of the things you have to do at the beginning is create your curriculum expectations by unit or by however you do it. Okay, so in Ontario, and I'm sure in the States and other places as well throughout Canada, we have our ministry mandated curriculum. So these are the expectations. And what we've done is we've got two examples here, one from Erin from her 9 gifted and one from my 9 applied. And I've just gone through, we went through and we picked out the curriculum expectations, and some of them, we lumped some of them together because we felt like they went together a little bit better. For those of you, a lot of you are doing spiraling, maybe you don't want to necessarily do it in units. You have a different way of organizing, but you do have to have somewhere where you're listing out your expectations, okay? And then we just made 3 columns, developing, refining, and mastery. For my 9s, I did say easy, medium, hard. I have to admit, I changed back to saying developing, refining, mastery, because I was like, I don't know if I wanted to say that. I kind of refer to it sometimes in class like that, just because I want them to kind of understand what's going on. And then there's a communication bar at the bottom. So we in Ontario are asked to consider knowledge, application, thinking, and inquiry when we do, and communication when we do this, when we assess students and when we're planning. So for communication, we just have a sliding bar at the bottom that we make check marks on when you're doing your assessments, whatever they might be, okay? So the idea is this is what you would fill out. You can see mine is a little bit more blank. I don't have the detail that Erin's has. Hers has sections where it's listed for quizzes, the Q for quizzes, T for tests, the OC were observations, conversations. And again, these things sort of evolve with time, because I think originally there was even 4 columns. There was beginning, developing, refining, mastery. And we just found that we didn't really need the beginning. It didn't fit in, and it was almost too many columns. So we just ended up taking it out. And, but this is why you sort of want to play around with it. And the idea from Peter's work is that when a student has shown mastery, they've shown that they can do questions that are in at the mastery level, then they've shown you that expectation. So you're looking at having a number of check marks in the mastery column. Sorry, I've got my phone here.
Yeah, Peter normally says kind of 2 check marks, but again, that's everything here is what you feel comfortable with. You're not stuck with anything.
Yeah.
And just to mention, the reason why I break mine down with the Q, the T, that kind of stuff was I wanted to see a timeline so I could see like, okay, here's the information from the quizzes, then we have our tests, then we have, and tests could be including like assignments or things like that, and then the observations, conversations. So it gave me like a timeline as we go through it to say, okay, here's how they were doing at the beginning of the unit, here's how they're kind of in this expectation towards the end of a unit. It was a quick way to organize it, but you could do this by color, you could do it in as many ways as you want.
Exactly. So yeah, as you go along, you'll find you're refining things how it fits for you. And that's the nice flexibility in all of this. Okay. Once you have this set up, so this is like your main tracking sheet, okay, for your unit. What you have to do is you need a method to get your assessments for your quizzes, your tests, your assignments, your observations. Somehow you need to get that onto those unit sheets, okay? So the next step is to think about your, whatever your assessment is. And here's something that was really a big selling point for us that we were really keen on, and we really wanted to make sure to let people know you don't have to change all of your assessments. This is not like, okay, suddenly you've got to redo everything. No, it really isn't. In fact, I find that it's more, the difference is not what you're assessing, but how and how you're recording it. That's almost the difference. So, Erin still has her unit test. It says unit test number 4. Mine, this was a quiz, it looked like, that I had. Sorry, this is another one of Erin's, another quiz. And all you do is you take your existing assessments and you basically go through your questions and just decide which expectations are you hitting and what level would you consider them to be. This takes some practice. Okay. I remember when I first started, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't like how do I judge that something is mastery? And Erin was very good at helping me even that one year. I remember she told me once, look, if you can think of a question and say, there is no harder question than this that a kid can do, that's a mastery level question. Okay. I mean, if you want to think of it as like a part A, B, C, you can think of it that way. Again, over time, you start to get to know your course and say, okay, yeah, that's a beginning question. That's a developing question, right? And you just fill it out. You fill out where everything is. And you also notice, I'll just point out here, there's a question 3C, you might see it there. It appears in 2 different expectations. And that's fine. That's kind of like, when you have a question and that we have questions all the time like this, where you've got a question that's worth maybe 3-4 marks because it's hitting different things that you want them to show, right? So you can absolutely list it under different sections, okay? I do that all the time. And it really gives that same idea, like this question is worth a bit more because it's under more categories, more expectations. And yeah, so again, there's a lot of flexibility here with how you set things up. And it really does actually make you think too about your own assessments and what you've been doing for a long time. Sometimes we forget. And if you start filling this out and you realize, wow, I've kind of missed like a whole part here, then, that it makes you rethink, like, what are you doing? You don't have to have things in every single section, okay? You don't. There are some topics that I find they just don't have like a, what I would consider to be a hard mastery level question. And that's okay, right? As long as in the end you feel like you are gathering enough data from these kids, okay? And when you're looking at their test, then rather than giving them a mark out of whatever it is, 3 or 4 on that question, you're just looking at that question 3C, for example, and saying, okay, did they know how to do this part and this part? Yes. Then I put check marks there. And there's a coding at the bottom. We try to keep it very simple. Do not make it complicated. I wouldn't go with any more than these 4 symbols, or you're going to start to drive yourself crazy. It's X, they didn't get it. Check mark, they got it. A dot is correct technique, minor error. you know, if they do something silly, like, you know, they wrote a 3 on one line and the next line and it's an 8, okay? That's a minor error. Do they really know the concept? Yeah, they know the concept. They just did something silly, okay? And then the O is when those kids just don't demonstrate it. They just don't try it, okay? Um, and for me in the 9 applied, I find that that's a big one. They often, it's just, you know, and so it encourages them when they start to see those O's there, they're like, oh, you know what, maybe I should just try it, right? So that's what you're going to do. You're going to fill those out as you mark. And then this would be something that you would give back to the students, okay? So you would give this back to the students and you would record it on your unit sheet, okay? So here's an example of one that was done, a quiz, that, and you can see there's only 3 expectations. It doesn't have to be big, right? And there's a couple of, there's an X, there's a dot, but the rest are check marks. And then so Erin would go back to her unit sheet. She'd fill this out on her unit sheet. And this is something the kids would get, okay? Now, I will say for Erin's class, the gifted class, she makes them record it on their own unit tracking sheet. Okay, so they actually have their own like student version. I don't in my 9 applied. I found it was too much for them. So I don't do that. I keep it for them. Okay. Yeah, and then this is an example of a filled out now unit sheet. Okay, so you can see there's Erin's on the left. She's got, this would be for a particular student for an entire unit. And you can see, you know, you don't have necessarily questions on developing for every single thing. You don't have to have that, okay? You can get a good enough picture looking at something like this. And even look at mine on the right-hand side. I added a little part here where I put a little assessments completed so that the kids could know what they completed and what they haven't, because sometimes they lose track of what have they missed. You'll see my last one, I said questions in class. That's like a, you know, observations and conversations. I didn't do it last semester, but I'm going to do it again this semester, where I'm going to have a weekly one where I just say, this is what you showed me in class during the week. And you'll see that I completely just got rid of one of the expectations because I didn't have time to carry it out. It was during COVID, and I'm like, okay, they can't designing and carrying out an investigation. It didn't happen. And that's okay. You know, there's nothing really, to me, if you're finding, you're collecting data, you're not concerned about, did I like get every single expectation, okay? We don't have to cover every single specific expectation. You do have to do overall, but you don't have to do your specifics. Sometimes it just doesn't happen, okay? And then from here, or I think, are you going to take over this part, Miss? I don't remember.
Yeah. So
yes, okay.
So I just wanted to add a couple things. So like what Carmen was saying, the deal breaker for me was I was not going to redo 20 years worth of work to make this work, right? Like, so I completely agree. Like, essentially all to be able to do this, I took quizzes and tests very similar to what I've had. I could take one from 5 years ago, take off anything that has to do with marks. So take off the total at the top and what each question's out of, and voila, you're still answering the same questions. The cool thing about it is if it's a good question, you can put it on. You don't have to go, well, I'd really like to put this question on, but it's going to be out of 8 marks and that one's out of 3. And so if it demonstrates something that they need to show you, you put it on, right? So there's not that waiting in terms of out of anymore. And that's a big change in our thinking. And as like Carmen was saying, I like to think of it as that whole idea of like splitting into different expectations. It's like, if there's 3 sort of conceptual steps that a kid has to show, then I can mark that on 3 different expectations, right? Like the kid might know how to distribute, but may not know how to collect like terms, right? So those are 2 different things that I'm assessing. Then I can do that. I can separate the concepts. And what's so beautiful about this is look how visual this is, right? At the end of a unit, or as we go through the unit. So the reason why we have the overall tracking sheet is it correlates everything all together, puts it all together. And like I say to the kids, you can have like a pile with different tracking sheets and assessment sheets for, this quiz, this test, and all that kind of stuff. But until you put all the data together, how are you going to know how to do this? In terms of, I see how much time did this add. To be honest, once the big time consuming thing was just setting up the chart. What am I looking for? What's the specific expectations? In our Ontario curriculum, it's literally in the curriculum, broken down by like this expectation, this expectation. So we group some of them because, some of them are so similar. So again, you can choose how you do that. If you don't have, because in other subjects, maybe you don't have specific expectations, or depending on how, things are set up, you could set it up as I can, right? I can distribute, I can collect like terms, right? I can graph a line. So you could set it up in that terms. It doesn't have to be from the curriculum. It was convenient for us. And maybe, if that's how you want to do it, maybe, that's somewhat more student friendly. But as I said, when I designed this, I was working with my gifted kids, and, they're a little more able to understand, the terminology and that kind of stuff. So yes, the alternatives are this. So as they're going through that, what I tell the kids is, you're going to have your quizzes, you're going to have your tests. For my kids, that's their comfort zone, right? They're I know how to do that kind of kids. So I said, I'm not taking those away from you. But what also gets added into here is I would actually have I call them conferences. So I'd conference with a kid and I'd say to them, okay, I'm not redoing questions, but if you're looking at this chart and you don't have two mastery, like if you look on the left hand side there, the second expectation, this kid has got a check mark in refining and no check marks in mastery. So that tells me they need to work on that particular expectation, right? They may not need to work on like the third last expectation there. I mean, what I say is dots are almost like check marks, right? You can be human. You can make the dumb error of losing the negative from one line to the next without, that's not a big deal as long as you show the correct work from there. So that's why we want to code these things. That's really what you're doing. You're not marking so much, you're coding it. What do I see? And so the actual making up of a test and then creating this chart is pretty basic. Like what I find is I take an old test. So literally I could take a test from 3 years ago, take away all the marks, I could give it to the kids. And sometimes I fill out the chart after the fact, right? I mean, it's good to do it probably before, because then you can hone in, like Carmen said, oh, I haven't hit something for this, or I want to focus more on this particular expectation. But the beauty of it is I've given it to the kids because I haven't had time to really code it all in there. And the reality is you're the one coding it. If you choose that to be a mastery question, then it's a mastery question, right? Sometimes maybe I could find one a little bit harder, but I want to count that. So there's so much flexibility. But yeah, say you're walking around the class and some kid says, Miss, can I show you that I can do this? Well, when they're done showing me and I know that they understand how to do that particular question, then I'm walking back over to my sheet and I can add a check mark, right? So the way that you can add it is completely whatever you want. So that's a really good question, Michael. So when I started this, I did this all on paper. So I had 2 clipboards because I had 2 classes with this, and I had 2 clipboards and every kid had a separate piece of paper. You can imagine the amount of paper. And yes, now I go digital. So essentially what we do 2 things, either Jamboard, because you can kind of basically have the chart there as even like a background, and you could just quickly put the check marks in. You could do this Google Slides even, have it so that the kids can see it but not change it. But the one thing that we also used was, what's the app called? Why am I forgetting it?
Notability.
There you go. So yeah, so when we first started, I really liked Notability because I had my iPad. So I could, walk around, have Notability up. Each kid had, their separate page, and I could just click on their page and then check on in as we go. So as I did my conferences with the kids, I always say to them, I'm not going to take away X's, right? I'm not going to ignore the data I have. If you didn't get it on the quiz and you didn't get it on the test, but you come in and have a conference, you're still going to see X check, but that's data for me. I see progress, right? And I see that you took the time to do that. So I can choose, how to do that. I don't know if there's any other questions, but the next step is kind of, how do we change this into marks? But I want to give you guys opportunities to ask anything so far before we get into that. I know I've seen them come up as we go, but I don't know if I missed anything.
don't think so. I was going to say that, you know, the idea of walking around with, you know, your iPad or whatever, in theory, it sounds wonderful, but I will say that, like,
It's
in a
busy.
in a big class, it's busy, it's hard to do. Okay. Um, right now my class is like super small, but that's because of COVID. And it's that's I have that advantage, right? Um, but you know, the thing that we have to remember, and Erin and I talk about this all the time, how we kind of have to stop ourselves because we're so ingrained that we think, you know, oh, I have to be fair to everybody. So I have to give everybody the same opportunity. I have to go check everybody. And the
Mhm.
reality is, if you're looking at what, you know, Peter's talking about, you want to be like check for that mastery. If you know a kid has like got it, you've seen them do it, you've heard them explain it. You don't need to talk to them. You don't need to conference with them. Okay. You need to be going to those kids who you're like, okay, I'm a little iffy. I'm not sure. Let's talk, let's see what we can do.
Yeah.
We're trying to really have more onus on the kid, like have more responsibility for them to say, miss, I'd like to conference with you, I'd like to talk with you. So you know, we're leading to that. We're trying to
Mhm.
learn that more.
Yeah.
Okay. So
And
you know, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
So what I was going to say is there's also alternatives, right? So you could be, if you're walking around and you see that kid did that great question, you know, the alternative is take a picture, right? Take a picture. You can look back later at the end of a day or at the end of the week and go, okay, oh, that was that kid. Like, have them write their name, take a picture. So at the end of the week, you could go through and say, oh, you know, Billy got that, right? So it doesn't have to be on the fly. So I think technology can help with that. And that's the other thing. So when I did conferences, so with my gifted kids, it very much is the onus is on them. But you know, when the kids comes to me and says, you know, and I'm willing to have the conversation, they're like, do I need to have a conference? That's a great conversation starter, right? And the best thing is the kids can look at this and visually, right? Like, who can't understand that when it's all check marks, you're good, right? And if there's only X's, you're bad. Not bad, but you know what I mean? Like, you need to work on that. That's your area of weakness, and that's the thing you still need to demonstrate. And that's really the focus. It's my question is never, did you get a good mark? It's have you mastered it, right? That's our end goal. We want to master it. And what's cool about this is there's some kids that are going to only, you know, mostly be in that, you know, developing stage. But if we can get them to refining, they love that, right? They see the progress, they love this, right? And if that kid who starts in refining can get into mastery, then again, that's progress for them. It's tailored to the kid. And, you know, when I explained this one time, you know, somebody, when I said I do conferences with the kids, they thought they had a conference with every single kid. And I said to them, look, I've got like nearly 60 kids. And in each unit, I maybe conference with 12 because they're the ones coming to me and saying, hey, I need to show you this, miss, right? And the ownership that they can take because it's so clear, like it's such a visual representation, that's pretty nice, right? And let's face it, for some of the weaker kids, when they look at it and they go, well, I got 50 on that, and I got 63 on that, and I got 48 on that. How am I doing? Right. Whereas they can see check, 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 X, right? Like, so you know, a lot of people think this is just, you know, changing marks into, you know, symbols, but that's really not what it is, right? We're seeing that progression along there. So if I mean, I'll jump into the next step then. So how do we actually make this into a mark, right? Because at some point we have report cards, and as much as, you know, it'd be nice not to have that, that's the reality. So here's the great thing. Again, there's flexibility in this. So sometimes there will be times where even those expectations, there may be expectations you've only touched on once. You can choose whether to put that in the mark, right? So what I always say is the first way you can customize this is each of the expectations that I'm looking at, I get to choose which expectations count for more. So I think in this example, and this is, by the way, when I was doing it on paper, so, you know, I may not even agree with what I've done here, but this is from the originals. You know, I took the first two expectations, I had more opportunities, they were more, you know, bigger focus for the unit. So I counted those as like weighted out of, you know, they were a weight of 2, whereas the other 2 were weighted out of 1. And so you know, you can create that weighted average in your calculation. So if there's certain topics you want to count more, then you count them for more. if there's certain expectations, like I said, if I only had one check mark for that last expectation, I'd weight it 0, right? We all know you can't ever hit everything on every test, right? There's lots of topics we discuss in class, but we never really assess them in that sense. So you don't have to hit everything every time, right? You don't want to kill yourself to get, oh, I don't have enough check marks here. That's okay. This time around, that may be the case. Maybe the next time around, you do more of them, right? Maybe less of something else. So it changes every time I do this, right? Just like everything else that happens. So in this particular case, if you look at this kid, again, thinking about the first two being a little bit more, sort of weight a little bit more, I'm going to put it out to you guys. So what kind of mark would you give this kid as a percentage for this unit? So we do it is we give a mark for each unit, and then at the end, we average those out. So where would you say this kid is? And as a rough idea, I always kind of say developing's kind of in that. So yeah, the first two I personally weighted them more. So the first two because I had more opportunity. So I always say if you think about each expectation, you want 2 check marks in that particular column to kind of count. So developing, I would say, is like in the 50s, maybe low 60s. Refining is your like 60s, 70s, maybe a little into the 80s, and then 80s, high 80s, 90s is mastery. Yeah. Oh, you're talking letters to people that don't talk letters. That's okay.
Oh.
I love it. Okay, so again, this is all up for debate, and even now I look back, I don't know if I'd give this mark, but this was my first time through. So here's my calculation, 54%. The way that I personally do it is I go through, and you're going to laugh at me, and that's okay. I give a mark out of 4.2 for each expectation. So I'll go through it and say, okay, that's a 3.9 out of 4.2, or that's a 2 out of 4.2, or whatever. And yeah, you can choose to weight each expectation how you wish, and all that kind of stuff. So I did this by hand. Now we have it all on Excel and nice little spreadsheets, which makes my life so much easier. But I really did start with paper and pencil, okay? And yeah, I don't recommend it, but it's good to start with. So we've got all the spreadsheets and everything for you guys too. So compare this one though to the next one. So this is a 54-ish. What would you say this kid should get? And ignore my bracket, that doesn't mean anything special. Yeah, 50 is fantastic. So notice in here, I initially had that beginning. So beginning was kind of like, what if you couldn't get to the 50%, right? So once you're in this developing, refining, mastering, you're passing, but it's whether, how good a mark. Okay, so I got a 75%. Anybody else want to guess before I show? Ooh, ever the optimist will. Okay, so this kid, yeah, 77. Good guesses. Okay. And we could go about this all the time, but here's an interesting one. And you know what, David, that's exactly what it was. In fact, Peter's suggestion was to start with pen and paper. And I have to say it was a good exercise because it allowed you to kind of customize and think about what goes on. So yeah, that one little dot, right? That one little dot. I made a stupid error. I lost a negative. Yeah, it's 100. You're darn right. So the way I explain it to kids is this. If I see an X, obviously we know what that means, right? If I see an open dot, like the O, that either means you didn't answer the question, or sometimes, like I find with my gifted, I don't get a lot of blanks, but sometimes, the question wanted to go here and you went that way. So you didn't actually demonstrate what I was looking for. So I think of the dot as pretty much being a check mark, the open, O as being pretty much an X. But in this case, like, look at this kid. Of course it's 100, right? Guess what that little dot tells me? They're human and not a robot, right? And this is where, that conversation when the kid says, I make all these silly errors. How do I stop making those silly errors? And we all know the solution is you will not, because you're not a robot, right? But now I have the flexibility. I don't have to give you 99.5. I can give you a dot, and then it's my decision to go, seriously? Yeah, this kid's awesome, right? So that's what the beauty of this is, right? The kids don't punish themselves for every single little thing, right? Of course I'll go back, yeah. to this one.
Yeah, I just wanted a chance to see it again. I was really off. So I was seeing mostly 2 checks in the mastery column, except in one spot.
Okay, so it's not just 2 checks. Peter calls it 2 check marks in a row. So it's about consistency, right? So I agree. I know maybe I should explain that. So yeah, so like looking at the second one, right? In the mastery, it goes, X check, X check, X. This happened to be all in a test. So what it's showing me is there's an inconsistency there. Do they have a pretty good understanding? Yes. Have they mastered it? Debatable. But here's the good news. It's up to you, right? It's up to you. So one of the things, the reason I like, for example, if you look at the last expectation, see how in the quiz they got X check, right? And then the test went check, check. So the reason why I personally break it down into columns or into rows is so that I see the chronology of that, right? I can look at it and go, okay, well, early on when we did the quiz, they might have goofed something up, but guess what? When they got to the test, they seemed to get it. And that's what we all call progress, right? And that's a good thing, right? It would be different for me if I saw check, check, and then we get to the test and I start seeing check, X, check, if I start seeing X's later, that's a curiosity and something that, do I judge that differently? Yeah, I do, right? Would I still get a 3.8? I don't know, right? That's all the thing. So Carmen does everything out of 4. So the way I translate into mark, and I know, excuse my 4.2s, people, I know it's weird. So I initially was essentially changing each expectation into a mark out of 4. So I would look at it and go, okay, well, you got 1 X off there, so maybe that's a 3.9 or a 3.8 out of 4. And that's how Carmen does it. So when I enter it into the marks and do my weighting and everything, I'm giving essentially a mark out of something. You could choose to give a mark out of 5, out of 10, whatever you choose. So I know Carmen likes 4. Why do I do 4.2? Because I teach gifted kids and they're all smart, most of them. They're all wonderful. And to me, there's a difference between the kid who can spit me back all the stuff that I tell them and the kid that can do something a little more unique, a little more interesting. So I needed that extra little zhuzh, if you know what I mean. So I do a 4.2. Yeah, because I need that flexibility, because we all know there's the difference between the kid that goes, you taught me this, I'm going to provide that, right? Whereas the kid who gives a unique solution, thinks of it from a different point of view. To me, I needed to be able to give them that little bit of extra. So that's, again, the beauty of this method. If you're a brain, you want to go, okay, I'm going to give this a mark out of 10 or a percentage out of 100, it's up to you. So that's where my numbers come from.
Yeah, I'm just going to interject here with a couple of things just to address some things in the chat because I type slowly. But yes, you have to be flexible depending on what your grade level is and what the, your clientele, the kids. My kids are kind of the other end of the spectrum, we say. They're the ones who they often struggle with math. And something that has come up in the chat has been that I do show my students their mark at the end of each unit, but I do want to say that is only probably about 4 or 5 times a semester. So it's not that often. And I find that for my guys, I've had to show it to them just because they have been it's so ingrained in their brain, a mark, a mark, a mark, a mark, a number, that like, even when I start putting checks and X's, I still, believe it or not, I still have, students who would see all these X's and then say, so am I doing good? What do you mean? So it's taking a while, and I'm learning also how to present it to them. Being in this situation with COVID does not help because I don't actually see them very much. But I have found that I have had to just every once in a while kind of say, hey, this is where you are in terms of a number. But I don't do it too often because, again, I don't, especially for those guys, they're not the strongest math students. And, for them to be, seeing quiz after quiz where they might see, 4 out of 10 or, whatever it is, it's awful. You don't want them to see that. So, that's why I don't. And I'm finding that it is helping. I think kids that otherwise would have shut down earlier do not, and they keep at it because they have an idea, but they really don't see that like every day in their face, what the mark is, right? And we want to get rid of that. Okay.
And to be honest, those conversations, like if a kid like this, who has this tracking sheet looking at them, and they come up to me and they go, Miss, like, how am I doing? How awesome is that conversation, right? Like just in itself, how valuable is it that the kid is caring enough to have that conversation with you, right? And that opens up the possibility and that opportunity to be able to say to them, like, okay, so let's look at this, right? You have to teach them how to read this too, right? So that kid in that third expectation, they're going, oh, I got X's. How do I fix that? That's what I hear from my guys, right? They're perfectionists. They want to fix it. And I go, well, why do you need to fix it? Because look over in the mastery. You have shown me you've mastered that, right? What happened before, and we all know, like sometimes they just goof up this question and get this one. But the reality is, and again, this comes from all of Peter's work, right? I have to say we can't take credit for that thinking, but that idea of like the 2 check marks in mastery comes from data he's collected that, that is sufficient, right? And you can debate that, you can change it, right? It is completely acceptable that, you get, for example, you could say you need to have 3 check marks or whatever, but the 2 check marks in mastery in a row seems to be a good thing, right? I think it works. And here's the other thing. The beauty of it is when I do this, and, to me, I have to be able to justify a mark, right? We all have to be comfortable with justifying it. The coolest thing is this. The first time I did this, because I was doing it on paper, I couldn't keep up with all the calculations. And I remember I kept going and I collected the data, and 2 units over, I still hadn't actually created the marks. And I was like, oh gosh, I got to get on this. And I tell the kids, like, look, behind the scenes, I am doing this. I'll let you know if you're struggling. Like I'm not going to let you get 30%, right? So I promise you'll see it. So one of the things that, I think is really cool is when I did that and I finally got to the marks, I was like, man, this is exactly where I think this kid should be. And when I did the mark and this kid gets, 83 and this kid got 84, when I do it, I just go a row at a time. I just go, okay, this row is this row is, I don't care what the expectation is. It's very blind. It's just like, okay, 3 check marks and an X. Okay, I'm going to give them this. 2 check marks and 2 X's. I'm going to give them this. And you get into the routine of it. And the coolest thing is the kid that gets 83, the kid that gets 84, I'm always looking back. And honest to God, you can see it in that because you're just consistently using the same sort of logic. When you get to the end, you can actually see that kid got 1 extra X, or that kid got a dot, 2 dots as opposed to, a check mark or something like that. So the cool thing is you can justify your marks. I feel comfortable telling the kid why you got 98 and this kid got, 89, right? I feel like that. And we can debate that. You can discuss this, right? I know some people with markless, they like to incorporate, having the kids, either estimate a mark or, you can open up to those discussions. That's something that because you have the flexibility of it. And the other thing is, it really is differentiated learning here, folks, right? Like if I need to give this kid a question, but that kid doesn't need it, then I do that, right? I don't have to, I don't have to feel bad because I've given that kid an extra opportunity. They don't see it that way. And I tell the kids that. I'm like, listen, you all have as many opportunities as you wish. But if you don't need that extra opportunity, it's not taking anything away from you to give that opportunity to this kid, because the next time it may be you that needs it, right? And that's the cool thing. They really do, they really do see it. So yeah, I see in the chat there, these are not marks, right? And that's a big change. It's an overall, right? When I look at this, how have you done for this thing? So if you want to, like I said, if you look across each row, and I literally do it blindly. When I do my marks, I'm going, okay, 3.9, 4.2, right? And I just quickly type it all in and we kind of get a mark. So let me show you the actual calculations. It's nothing really fancy, but we do have it now as an Excel spreadsheet. Oh my gosh, what a game changer. To do this by hand was painful. So this is what it would look like, right? So across the top, I can weight. So this particular unit had a lot of expectations. So each expectation I could choose. So you'll notice we didn't have actual, evaluations for this. So they're out of 0, right? Weighted 0. I enter in my marks at a 4.2. And again, this is where you could choose to make it a mark out of 10, 100, 5. Carmen does 4. Whatever makes sense to you. And then at the end, it spits out. For communication, I actually do communication. I count it as 5% of the entire course. So at the end, I kind of combine all the communication marks and add that as a 5% thing at the end. That's how I do it. Again, you could choose to add it into the calculation. So I wish I could see all the chats, but I'll catch up with it later. And then here's the last part, right? I take all the units, we average that all out. We can add in, so in grade 9 here, we have an EQAO test. I had a summative that was 5%. Communication, like I said, was the 5%. We had a final written exam of 20, and voila, you still get, your overall final marks. So, it works very beautifully. And as I said, like, the cool thing is if you're going through it and you think, wow, this is really harsh, then you can reassess and you could say, well, maybe I need to count this more or this less. And it sounds artificial and it seems like we're just, making it work, but there's ways to justify it. Yeah, like sometimes kids are going to get bad marks. Sometimes they're going to get great marks. What I've seen is overall, the marks have gone up on average for this course about 2-3%. So I'm teaching this gifted class for 7-8 years. And, honestly, it was amazing. When I looked back, the averages were so consistent. It was like almost every year, like the same. And they really have adjusted. And that's what Peter's noticed, right? Is that is a goal, right? That we're seeing good things. For us, we can't do communication. Well, we do communication marks, but we count communication marks as like you've got the proper format, you rounded things correctly, you put equal signs. It's more the math formatting. You could certainly include that as participation if you're allowed. That's sometimes a sketchy thing around our parts. Like we can't count homework and stuff like that. So you could add whatever you wanted to.
See, what's great about this too, though, like, for years, we were told, no, you can't give like effort marks or participation or homework marks. And it's just like, are you kidding me? In some ways you're like, really? But now, then, we started to say, oh, but, you can have conversations and observations. And I'm like, okay. So when, students are up at the boards, because, like a lot of you guys, I'm sure it's the same as we have vertical non-permanent spaces. They're up at the boards, they're doing work. If I see that a student is doing work and I can clearly see they're getting it, I walk over to them, we have a conversation about it. I can put a check mark in. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I color code things, so I know that that's like my observations, right? So it's great. So, communication. In the 9 applied curriculum that I'm teaching, there's so much stuff in the curriculum where it says they should be able to describe a rate of change. They should be able to describe the steepness of a line or whatever it might be, okay? And that doesn't mean written necessarily. And some of the kids are actually better at verbal. And, if I have kids who are, this is great for ELL kids to start to have them talking, right? And, showing things on the board. It's so great for that because I'm finding there's kids who,
they can do videos.
They can do videos. There's so many ways that you can get them to show their mastery. And that's just what I love about it. And to speak to the differentiated thing, I know we're almost at 9:32, but something that I've done in my applied class that I absolutely love, hard to do with COVID, but I did it before. When I gave a quiz, I might have it on 2 pages. And what I would do is I would go up to some students who I knew were very strong. I said, these first couple questions, you need to do them. I already knew that they know how to do it. I said, you don't need to do them. Just show me this one here. And I would go to, sometimes I would even say to them, I challenge you. Mm-hmm. I think this is a good one for you to do, right?
Yeah.
And I would sort of start where I knew they were going to be successful and then kind of go up from there. And then on the same quiz, I might give a student like a different page and say, I just want you to do, these ones are good. And I never would give them the second page of the harder ones because they're just aiming for refining, and we know we have kids like that. They're just, so let them be successful where they're successful.
Yeah. Why beat them with the thing they're not going to be able to do, right? The fact that you could break that down is amazing. Right? Yep. And I know that I've had conversations with people who decided that they would actually break their test into developing, refining, and mastery. And then what they would do is they would tell the kids pick. And now I'm not comfortable with that because I don't know that the kids always know what they should pick, right? But it certainly it cuts down on marking, right? If you gave them 3 options for, say, a question and say you pick which level you think you're at and answer that question, you're marking 1 question as opposed to 3. Now I'm not as comfortable because, like I said, I get a little anxious that the kid's going to overreach or underreach, right? So, but that's a thought, right? I do know people who've tried that. Yes. And that's the thing, right? So being able to explain, that's why actually when I do my conferences, I always put it into mastery. If a kid can sit there and explain their steps, you have mastered a conversation. That's mastery in my world, right? Like if you can justify why, it's awesome. So just to kind of finish up really quick, and then hopefully if people want, I know we're like running late, but if you want to stick around. For the results and stuff, you've probably already read that. There's so much. We've talked about all of that. But I did want to just share with you. So as I was beginning all of this, I've collected, comments from kids and that kind of stuff. So, I'm just going to kind of briefly put them in there, but, these were good comments. And I hate to go quickly, but we can share this too. And I know it's being recorded. Some of them were like, I like the second one where it's like, I did not really know what an X stands for and how much is worth. This was very beginning and, they need to be taught this, right? My favorite though was the last one because it's like, if this kid gets a chance to redo it and they get 100, then how come I get 100, they get 100, right? Like, no, I get that, but at the same time, like it's changing their mindset. Like I always say to them, guys, they're not redoing. This isn't a get out of jail free card, right? What it is I'm allowing them a chance to give me more data. Would I give that kid who's had XXX and then they come and talk to me? Would I give them 100 on that expectation? Probably not. In fact, I will tell you, no, I would not. But again, it's that flexibility. And, Peter says, right, math is not a competitive sport, right? If you get 100, everybody else can get 100. There's not a limited number of 100s to give out there. And because of the collaboration and the sort of, system that we're doing and, groups and that kind of stuff, it's not competitive. They work together. And the beauty of it is they can't say, well, what did you get on that, right? What are they going to say? I got 16 X's and a check mark, right? Like it's not a conversation they can have. So they're not competitive. They're not going, well, I got this and I got that, they need to be taught as much as we did, But what's also, I actually asked parents for feedback and I got it, like, how cool is this? And so, yeah, like it's interesting that the parents see, especially as you can see through the comments, the stress relief. The kids are not crying at home because if a kid has a rough day on that test or that quiz, then guess what? I can say to them, guys, don't worry. You know what? Then tomorrow, the next week, 2 weeks from now, let's sit down, let's go through some questions. You can show me, what you can do. Let me throw some thoughts at you. Tell me what and show me what you can do. And how much relief that provides to a kid is amazing, right? And that to me is number one why I did this. Okay.
Yeah. I'd love to see the day that we're going to move this forward to our grade 9 class. Like we're doing it here with our grade 9s next September, for those of you in Ontario.
I love that. Sorry.
That we are we're putting together, we're having de-streamed, which basically means the academic and applied kids will be together. So that's going to create, some interesting challenges. But, I already talked with Erin about this, and this is, to me, that's the way to go for those classes, because you can do so much flexibility, so much differentiation. It's the way to go. And I mean, my goal is that, like, as a department head, I'm going to get, like, our grade 9 team is going to be doing all of this, and then hopefully moving forward. But, if I could do this in a grade 12 class, I mean, there are people out there who are doing it. Okay. Yeah. And it's just a matter of, COVID, there was a little bit too much for me to, I was thinking about it. I'm like, I can't do it right now. But, yeah. I really think for a grade 12 class, we have so much anxiety in our school. It is ridiculous.
They're the kids that need it the most. They need this.
Oh,
so we know if next year we can get all the grade 9s, then the hope is the next year it'll be all the 10s. in our school, I think we need to progress it through. But yeah, in certain areas of Ontario, there are schools doing for every subject, markless, gradeless, whatever you want to call it. There are kids who will graduate from 9 through 12 and having never seen a mark in any class. So it's out there, right? It's few and far between so far, but yeah, it's there's nothing about this that I don't like. And there's a little bit of setup, there's a little bit of getting used to it, but the one deal breaker for us, we're working moms, we don't have time to do a lot of things. And if it meant throwing away everything I've done for 20 years and remodeling everything, I was never going to do it, right? I would never have done this. That was the deal. I had to find a way to make this work without killing myself. And and I don't. This isn't more. It's just different. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, it's different, but it's so rewarding. Like we have talked about how it's just all of this it's invigorating, it's rewarding. I mean, you guys know, moving yourself to a building thinking classroom is just it's so great. And it is the logical next step, because you've got to be able to value the things that you're doing in the class, right? You're valuing that group, that discussion, that's what you're valuing. So you're showing the kids that it means something, and I think that's really important. Yeah, well, we're at 9:36, folks.
I know.
So I'm thinking, I think we've hit the questions in the chat.
Yeah, I don't know if we missed any, but
you guys got off easy on the questions tonight. I was
gonna say, I think people were just trying to keep up.
Well, I think you had us spun quite tightly around your finger. This was a very great session, so thank you.
You're very welcome.
I've got a lot of notes for myself to go pick back through. So expect a lot of emails now that you put your email addresses up there.
Yeah, exactly. We shouldn't have done that. You're very welcome, everybody.
Yep.
Yeah, so we'll be quite happy to share our care package. We can, we'll have the spreadsheets that we have, the parent emails. If there's anything else, yeah, find us there, because we're very happy to share for sure.
Yep, no problem.
And I'm going to add just a little bit at the end here. First of all, this is not an easy topic. Assessment was actually the first practice sharing session we had. I wanted to be on assessment, and Al, who was part of that, had said, that might not be the one you start with. You might not open with that one, which was sage advice. And I see this being the first of many conversations. But for the people who attended and who might now go modify and tweak and readjust, and as they go, the point of these practice sharing sessions is to share the practices. So I encourage all of you, if you have something worth sharing with the rest of us, to please then share back. When Judy Larson and I first had these conversations, we always thought the conversation would be, well, if I share what I do and you share what you do, then we can have the conversation about the same, what's different, and then maybe both of us will be able to improve our practice that way. And so that was the impetus behind all of this. And I hope people are willing to do that going forward. And always email me and say you have something you want to share, because otherwise I got to track people down.
Yeah, and that's awesome, because that's what we want too, right? Like, we feel like sometimes we're in a bubble, right? There's within our own board, and I've been involved with different people with thinking classrooms. We have a group of people within our board, and it's pretty small, who are doing building thinking classrooms. But in that, I'm the only one going on a regular basis that is doing this. So the more people we get, I mean, obviously this is just our thoughts and how we've taken it. We'd love to refine this going forward as well. So no, thank you. Thanks for everybody.
And then I have one quick question just for you too. The results of how your students have performed, not necessarily performed, because I don't think this is a performance sport, but you had students and you had your assessments prior to this. Now you're doing this. The mindset of students has changed. You've talked about that. Have you seen other effects, other results? Are more people passing than weren't passing? Are they being more successful than they had historically been in subsequent classes? Have you noticed anything along those lines, even anecdotally?
I know I have, for sure. Like in my 9 applied group, I can, like, there's stories that I can say that, I mean, I was so proud of the fact that, like, I had some students in my class who I knew they weren't even going to their other classes. Like, these are the kind of kids, they had struggles, right? And yet the class they want to go to is math. You know, and it's not necessarily even that the marks changed a lot. I think it's that just the mindset of like liking math a bit more. And I think that was, for me, that was a huge thing. I had a student in my class who got, no word of a lie, he got about an 84 in my class. He was really strong in math. He had definite learning disabilities, could not write solutions. It was just a mess, but he could describe them, and he definitely had the ability. And this kid, like, he actually failed all of his other classes. And I was just like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm glad that I held on to him for that. But, you know, I think under a quote unquote more traditional setting, I don't think he would have made it in that class.
Yeah. And I mean, for my kids, as I said, I did see it in terms of overall averages of the class. I saw progression that way. You know, and I have to say, I've given out more hundreds than, you know, maybe you're comfortable with, but it's amazing, right? Like, I used to never give out hundreds, you know, there'd be the 99 and maybe one every once in a while, but the hundreds have been happening more often. But what I see is the kids who have always been essentially perfectionists, right? There's always those kids who are desperate for marks. They hit themselves, they beat themselves for every little error. And that's the beauty of it, is the amount of times I've, you know, heard from kids, especially coming into a gifted, that label, I think somebody mentioned it, right? The label of gifted, it actually, to me, it's a big deterrent. I hate it, right? It puts the pressure on the kids. And the cool thing is they can come in and going, like, you can see they're nervous, they're scared. And then when you can say to them, well, look, you're going to get another opportunity, right? It's okay. Give me what you can, right? And then we'll talk about it later. The pressure being off, the mindset is so different. The fact that how many of them actually say to me, like, I really like math again, right? Like, we somehow beat it out of them. And then, like, it's just by and large, the amount of just the mental game is amazing. Yes, I see the, you know, the benefits mark wise, and there's definitely kids who, you know, a lot of times you lose them ahead of, you know, if you gave them like a 50 on the first quiz, there's some kids that go, okay, I'm done, right? Because it's always going to affect the rest of my mark. Whereas you can say to them, look, no, there's more opportunities. It keeps them moving. It keeps them motivated, right? And that's huge.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
That matches with some experiences I've had too. I do remember one young woman who just cried at the end of the year. She'd never done that well. And, you know, she'd always gotten passed through sympathetically by the teachers, and it was like, well, we don't want to hold her back. You know, she's a lovely person and she's trying hard, but she just needs more time, more opportunities. She finally had it with a little bit of feedback along the way to guide the process, and she was just beyond, you know, beside herself. Yeah, which is great. All right, well, thank you again.
It's amazing.
Thank you, everybody.
Right. Yes.
Feel free,
Thanks,
email
guys.
us.
Yep.
Appreciate having us.
Yep. Looking forward to the next conversation. That's for sure. It's great.